My name is Rebecca Hart. I'm 37 years old. And this is the story of how my husband betrayed me during the darkest moment of my life, and how I made sure neither he nor his little secret ever forgot what it means to underestimate a woman who's lost everything. The day it happened started with grief. My mother's memorial was held at a quiet, sun-warmed chapel in Santa Monica. The pews were filled with hushed faces, the kind of distant relatives and neighbors who come more for obligation than mourning. I stood in the front row, hands folded so tightly my fingers ached, while I watched her urn get carried to the altar like a final, cruel reminder that the one person who had always told me to trust my gut was no longer here. Afterwards, I made the slow walk back to our penthouse alone. Tyler said he had a client conflict and would join me later. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. My heels clicked against the tile floor as I stepped into the elevator, eyes stinging with exhaustion and pain. I wanted nothing more than to peel off the black dress clinging to me like morning itself and disappear beneath my sheets. The apartment was silent when I opened the door. Still, sterile, cold, just like how our marriage had felt lately. I passed the entry mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Smudged eyeliner. Hollow eyes. A shell. My chest was still tight from holding back tears all day. But as I entered the bedroom, something small, something stupid, changed everything. Tyler's iPad was on the nightstand. A message lit up the screen, "Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow?" At first, I thought maybe it was spam. Then, something about the timing, the casual intimacy of it, hit me sideways. My hands moved before my mind could catch up. I unlocked the iPad. His password hadn't changed. And there it was. Dozens of messages. Steamy photos. Hotel confirmations. Pet names like Ty Bear. And the sender? Rachel Peterson. 24 years old. A new intern at his firm. A girl I had shaken hands with at a corporate brunch just weeks ago. I remembered her red lipstick and nervous smile. I remembered Tyler saying she was just a kid who needed mentorship. What I saw on that screen wasn't mentorship. It was betrayal. It was infidelity in high definition, hotel room selfies, lingerie shots, flirtatious client meetings booked under fake names. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat down beside the bed, palms cold, staring blankly at the device in my hand. My mother had just been laid to rest, and while I was losing the only woman who had ever truly loved me, my husband was playing house with someone barely old enough to rent a car. Tyler and I had been together 14 years. Married 6. We met at UCLA Law, back when he was a teaching assistant with a charming smile and I was a student who believed in ambition more than love. We fought through 3 failed rounds of IVF, supported each other through promotions and layoffs, and buried dreams quietly when they didn't come true. I had bruises on my abdomen from hormone injections. I had stretch marks from hope. I had trusted him with every part of me. And he had been slipping away to hotels with an intern. I stayed up that night on the floor of my office. Not crying. Not grieving. Planning. I created a folder on my laptop titled The Truth. I compiled everything. Screenshots. Emails. Booking receipts. Even the gym sessions that now aligned a little too perfectly with his supposed late-night meetings. Each click felt like a cut. But I kept going. Because for the first time in months, the numbness had lifted, and in its place burned something raw and dangerous, clarity. Tyler thought he was clever. But he'd underestimated me. That was his first mistake. He didn't know I still had access to his work email from the time I helped him reset it after a software update. He didn't know that I had a close friend, Joanna Reeves, who had become one of the most relentless private investigators in Los Angeles, specializing in financial misconduct. Joanna and I met over coffee in Pacific Palisades the next morning. I told her everything. She didn't gasp. She didn't pity me. She simply opened her leather-bound notebook and said, "You're not here just because he cheated. You're here because he crossed a line." She was right. This wasn't about a fling. This was about betrayal layered with lies. Abuse of company funds. Disrespect at the core of everything I had sacrificed for. Within a few days, Joanna handed me a thick dossier. In it, company charges for client dinners that never included clients. Hotel stays booked under Tyler's name and reimbursed as corporate expenses. Designer bags purchased on the company card. Receipts for spa visits, champagne, and luxury rides. Rachel wasn't just a fling. She was a liability. A beneficiary in a scheme bigger than infidelity. And then came the twist that took my breath away, a silver USB drive Tyler had left in his office drawer. I found it while pretending to drop off dry cleaning during one of his supposed meetings. On it? Confidential expansion plans, employee layoff lists not yet announced, and merger details he had no authority to possess. Documents that weren't just private, they were illegal for him to have in his possession. He had gone from unfaithful to unethical. I didn't call him out. Not yet. I was collecting chess pieces, quietly lining up the board. Letting him move blindly, thinking I was still asleep. Because the truth? I wasn't planning to scream. I was planning to expose. Not just him, but the rot beneath his perfectly tailored suit. And so I made a phone call. To his company's executive assistant. I introduced myself as his project liaison, speaking with the same calm tone I'd used in courtrooms. I explained that Tyler needed Rachel to present at the upcoming quarterly meeting on his behalf due to an urgent client conflict. The assistant hesitated. I pressed gently. He wanted to give her a chance to shine. And just like that, Rachel was scheduled to speak before the board. She had no idea I'd be there too. Rolling 2 suitcases into the room. And unzipping a reckoning no one would ever forget. The morning of the meeting arrived like the calm before a hurricane. I stood in my walk-in closet, not selecting a dress but armor. A fitted black blazer. A high-waisted pencil skirt. Neutral beige heels. Every piece said power, not desperation. I didn't wear this to impress them. I wore it to remind them that I belonged. I wasn't a wife stumbling through betrayal, I was a woman walking straight into a war she had already won. 2 suitcases sat by the door. 1 navy. 1 silver. The navy held Tyler's carefully folded belongings, his favorite Zegna shirts, monogrammed cufflinks, cologne, a bottle of vintage scotch. The silver held evidence. Receipts, files, printed emails, screenshots, all chronologically ordered, labeled, tabbed. It wasn't just a case. It was a story. And I was going to make sure everyone heard it. I arrived at Lennox and Rudd's Century City headquarters at exactly 8:15 a.m. The receptionist recognized me by name. I offered a polite smile and told her I was delivering presentation materials. Nobody questioned me. Why would they? I looked like someone who had a right to be there. The elevator ride up was quiet, the floor numbers lighting up one by one. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handles. This was it. 14 years of partnership, 6 years of marriage, 3 rounds of IVF, and 1 brutal discovery. It all led to this room. This moment. This reckoning. The doors opened. 19th floor. Boardroom A. A sign outside read, "Quarterly Strategic Review, Executive Attendance Required." The voices inside were low, confident, professional. I could hear Rachel speaking. Her tone was bright, rehearsed, excited. She had no idea what was coming. I rolled both suitcases down the hallway, each one gliding silently across the carpet. But in my head, they thundered. With every step, my pulse steadied. Not racing from fear, but sharpening from purpose. Then I opened the door. The room went still. 20 executives. 1 CEO. Legal advisors. Heads of departments. And at the center of the presentation screen, Rachel. She stood near the table, pointing at a graph, completely in her element. Until she saw me. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Her smile faltered. She blinked, trying to process why I was there and why I had luggage. I stepped forward with slow, deliberate movements and said, "Good morning." Silence. All eyes turned to me. I'm Rebecca Hart. You may know me as Tyler Mitchell's wife, or rather, soon-to-be ex-wife. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Rachel turned pale. I rolled the navy suitcase to the center of the room and opened it calmly. Inside, Tyler's belongings. Immaculately folded. Clearly intentional. I pulled out his white Zegna shirt and laid it gently across the table in front of Rachel. You probably recognize this, I said, my tone even. He wore it to client meetings. At least, that's what he told me. I imagine it came off sometime between champagne and room service. The silence was heavy now. Not awkward, but stunned. A slow, building storm that no one wanted to interrupt. I reached in again and removed a velvet box. Inside? The Omega watch I had given Tyler on our first anniversary. I held it in my palm for a second longer, then set it gently beside Rachel's remote control. That was a gift. I suppose it suits his new assistant better now. Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the remote down, fingers twitching like they were about to snap. Then I rolled forward the silver suitcase. This, I said, is more important. From inside, I pulled out a thick red ribbon-tied document folder and handed it to the CEO, Mr. Grant Harland. These are expense reports, filed by Tyler Mitchell, claiming business dinners, hotel stays, and consulting fees. All fraudulent. All linked to one individual. I glanced at Rachel. Who is not, in fact, a registered client. Mr. Harland's expression hardened. He flipped through the pages while I continued, laying out spa receipts, Uber logs, and screenshots of emails where Tyler had fabricated meeting notes. But then came the real blow. I reached into my purse and pulled out a separate file, one marked with yellow sticky notes. This is a copy of confidential company data Tyler stored illegally on a USB drive in his home office. Expansion strategies, employee layoffs, and pending merger negotiations. Data he had no clearance to view, much less possess. Gasps. Not theatrical ones. The kind that escape when the floor gives out under your feet. And in here, I continued, placing the final folder in front of the general counsel, are communications between Tyler and Rachel, in which she's promised a promotion for her cooperation. Everyone froze. Rachel looked like she might collapse. I turned back to the room, scanning every face. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I believe a company's integrity starts from the top. And right now, you have a serious problem with your leadership. That's when Dana Whitmore, the head of HR, stood up. Miss Peterson, she said in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, please come with me. Rachel didn't move. She blinked at Dana, then looked at me. And finally at the files on the table. She tried to speak, but nothing came. She gathered her things slowly, her hand brushing the watch I had placed there, then recoiling from it like it was poison. As she followed Dana out, every head in the room turned with her, except mine. I was already zipping the silver suitcase closed. Mr. Harland stood, cleared his throat, and looked at me. Miss Hart. Rebecca, he corrected. Do you intend to take this to the authorities? I'm hoping you handle it internally, I said. But if you try to bury it, I'll dig deeper than you ever imagined. He nodded. And then he asked, you're an attorney? Former head of legal at Shoreline Strategies, I replied. I now consult independently. He looked thoughtful. Maybe it's time you consulted for us. I gave a half smile. Maybe. I left the suitcase in the center of the room. Not because I needed to, but because it no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the mess he made. To the lies he told. To the company he thought would never know. And as I stepped out of the elevator and into the lobby, my phone buzzed. Tyler Mitchell. Calling. I smiled faintly, picked up, and didn't say a word. Amelia, what's happening? Why did Rachel just text me? She knows everything. What the hell did you do? I kept my voice low and lethal. You should ask yourself that. Everything I know, Tyler, came from the two of you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard it, the breathless panic creeping into Tyler's voice like a crack widening through polished glass. You don't know what you're doing, he said, a little too fast. You're not thinking clearly, Rebecca. This could ruin everything. I let him flail for a second longer before responding. The only thing I've ruined is the illusion you were still a good man. He went quiet. I could practically hear the gears in his head spinning, calculating damage control, imagining which strings he could pull, which lies might still work. But this wasn't a conversation. This was a confirmation. I didn't need his confession. I had evidence. Truth didn't need his permission. Then came the venom. His voice dropped an octave, low and tight. If this is about humiliating me, congratulations. You got what you wanted. But don't think for 1 second I'll let this slide in court. I'll make the divorce ugly. I leaned against the cool marble wall of the lobby and smiled, calm as the eye of a storm. Tyler, I said evenly, do you remember who wrote our prenup? He didn't respond. I did. My draft. Your lawyer reviewed it, signed it, notarized it. Remember the infidelity clause? The one that says the guilty party forfeits all rights to premarital assets? Another pause. Longer this time. He knew. I could feel the panic rising in his silence like water in a sealed room. That includes the Westwood house, I continued. The brokerage accounts. My shares in Shoreline Strategies. Everything I brought into the marriage. You don't even get the couch unless I agree. I could almost hear his pride crumble like sandpaper against stone. Then, a growl. You're ruining my life. No, I said softly, you did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure no one else steps in it. Click. I ended the call and blocked his number. Just like that. No tears. No goodbye. Just the cold, clean break of a woman finally done pretending her silence kept the peace. By noon, the board had gone into emergency session. Tyler hadn't even made it to the building before security revoked his access. The files I'd left were being reviewed in real time by corporate legal and the ethics committee. My phone lit up with a message from Joanna. They're moving fast. SEC's about to get wind of this too. Proud of you. It wasn't pride I felt. It was peace. A strange, steady kind of quiet. Like after a fire, when the air still smells of smoke but you're safe. That evening, I took a long shower. No phone. No laptop. No headlines. Just me. For the first time in years, my body didn't feel like it was bracing for another blow. I made tea. I turned on jazz. I opened my journal. And I wrote, he thought breaking me would make me small. But I wasn't built to shatter. I was built to rise. The next morning, Tyler's termination email was sent company-wide. It didn't name names or give details, but everyone understood. The hallway whispers became ghostly quiet. The man who once held court in corner offices was now a cautionary tale, erased from the company directory like he had never existed. Rachel didn't last long either. She was quietly reassigned to documentation support. A windowless office. No access to clients. No projects. just a slowly ticking clock and the sound of a reputation imploding in silence. 3 months later, she disappeared from the staff roster. I didn't look her up. I didn't need to. I knew what it felt like to be young, ambitious, and stupid. But I had never climbed over someone's body to get ahead. And I certainly didn't torch someone's marriage in the process. A few weeks later, Tyler called again. From a new number. This time he didn't threaten. He begged. We loved each other once, he said, his voice hoarse and tired. You don't have to take everything. I looked at a photo of my mother on my desk, her warm eyes, her tired hands, her voice in my memory saying, trust yourself, even if no one else does. Then I replied in a tone I hadn't used since the courtroom days, firm and final. You took everything from me. My trust. My time. My peace. I'm not taking anything. I'm keeping what's mine. You just lost the illusion you ever deserved it. There was no rebuttal. Just the dull, hollow hum of a man who finally realized the game was over. The divorce finalized with no dispute. The prenup held. He kept only his clothes and a leased car. I sold the penthouse. Too many memories. Too many ghosts. I bought a small 2-story home in Silver Lake. Modest. Peaceful. The kind of place where morning sun hits the kitchen sink just right, and you can hear wind chimes instead of sirens. I planted red geraniums on the balcony because my mother always said they brought good luck. I adopted a golden retriever named Rusty, sweet, loyal, watchful. He followed me room to room, napping at my feet while I worked. Barked when strange men approached the gate. Not in fear, but as if to say, not this time. Each day, I walked him around the lake with a warm cup of coffee in hand. I read books again. Real books. No more legal manuals. I let sunlight find my skin and didn't recoil. I allowed myself to exist without orbiting anyone else's gravity. Months passed. Then one afternoon, I received an email. From Lennox and Rudd, Office of Ethics Reform. Subject: Proposal for Corporate Ethics Consultation. They wanted me to help them rebuild their integrity, policy by policy, protocol by protocol. I sat in front of the screen for a long moment, thinking how strange the world is. One day you're a silent wife in the corner of a boardroom. The next, you're standing behind the podium, rewriting the entire culture that tried to exclude you. I accepted. But not for them. For every woman watching. For every employee too afraid to speak. For every intern who didn't get the job by warming someone's sheets but by earning her damn place. I wasn't loud. I wasn't famous. But I had become something better. Unshakable. The first time I walked into the corporate auditorium in San Diego, this time not as anyone's wife, but as Rebecca Hart, ethics consultant, the silence felt different. Not judgmental. Not skeptical. But focused. I stood under a banner that read, Rebuilding Company Culture, Starting with Courage. That word, courage, echoed in my chest like a heartbeat. I adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began. Most people assume betrayal comes with shouting, tears, slammed doors. But sometimes, it arrives in silence. Through a message on a screen. Through receipts hidden in plain sight. Through the absence of someone who should have been by your side, but wasn't. They listened. Really listened. Not because I was polished or powerful, but because I was real. And they could feel it. I told my story, not with bitterness, but clarity. I didn't name names, but I didn't protect them either. I walked them through the importance of corporate transparency, the cost of silence, and what it means to hold the powerful accountable. I didn't preach from a pedestal. I stood in the middle of the rubble I had once crawled out of, and I spoke as someone who had chosen to rise instead of rot. After the session, a young woman from accounting approached me with tears in her eyes. Your story, she whispered. It felt like mine. That's why I did it. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. But because someone had to say it out loud, you are not crazy for seeing what no one else wants to admit. Back at home, I created a new routine. Coffee at sunrise. Walks with Rusty. Work in the afternoons. Sometimes corporate training, sometimes policy writing, sometimes just helping companies set up ethical whistleblower protocols that actually meant something. Then, something unexpected happened. I began the adoption process. It wasn't about replacing what I'd lost or filling the silence in my house. It was about choosing a different kind of love. One that didn't hinge on perfection or performance or promises that broke under pressure. It was about giving love that was whole, even if I wasn't. The paperwork was grueling. The interviews invasive. But nothing compared to the ache I'd carried for years inside a marriage that was beautiful on paper and broken behind closed doors. Then one cold February morning, I got the call. A 6-month-old baby girl in Oregon. Her name was Isla. The first time I held her, wrapped in a pale pink blanket with her little fingers curling toward mine, I knew I'd never be the same. She's unusually calm, the nurse said. It's like she's been waiting for the right person. I smiled softly. So have I. We moved again. This time to a coastal town where the streets smelled like salt and sugar, where the baker knew your name, and the library still stamped due dates in the back of the books. My new house wasn't fancy. But it had something the penthouse never did, peace. I set up a nursery with soft seafoam walls and a mobile of clouds above her crib. Rusty quickly appointed himself Isla's personal guard dog, always near, always gentle, as if he understood her importance without being told. Every night, I read to her. Not princess stories, but real ones about brave women, bold women, broken women who healed themselves and built new lives. I wanted her to grow up knowing that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was quiet. Steady. Enduring. And slowly, something began to settle inside me. A knowing. That I was never meant to stay small. That I had lived through enough silence, enough betrayal, enough compromise for a dozen lifetimes. That this version of me, wiser, scarred, but steady, wasn't the aftermath of the storm. She was the storm. Months turned into a year. Tyler faded into the distance like a bad headline that no one remembered reading. Rachel deleted all her social media. Word around the industry was that she'd left marketing and moved to another city. I didn't care where. Some ghosts are best left to wander. Then came the day I saw my name in a professional journal, Rebecca Hart, the woman behind the policy reform movement at Lennox and Rudd. I blinked at the headline. Not because I didn't believe it, but because it was the first time I truly saw myself through someone else's eyes. Not as the woman whose husband cheated. Not as the ex-wife. But as the change. The fire starter. The architect of something better. That evening, as Isla slept in my arms and the lavender outside my window swayed in the evening breeze, I whispered something to her, not because she could understand the words yet, but because I needed to say them. You saved me, little one. Not because I needed rescuing, but because you reminded me that I still had something worth fighting for. And I had. I had fought for the truth. For dignity. For a future built on something stronger than silence. The first few weeks of motherhood were a blur of midnight feedings, lullabies whispered in the dark, and a quiet I hadn't known in years, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from finally being at peace. There was no husband snoring in the other room. No weight of questions I was too afraid to ask. Just me, my daughter, and the steady rhythm of starting over. During one of those sleepless nights, holding Isla against my chest while the wind tapped against the window, I thought about how far I'd come. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strange part. I wasn't seething, plotting, or even waiting for karma. I didn't need Tyler to suffer to feel free. He'd done that all on his own. All I had done was hold up a mirror. And when he saw his reflection, he shattered. I still got the occasional update through mutual connections, old coworkers, LinkedIn whispers, the occasional text from someone trying to bait a reaction. Apparently, after his termination, Tyler struggled to land anything close to his former position. Word traveled fast in corporate circles, especially when an ethics breach left behind a paper trail thick enough to bury a career. He eventually accepted a low-tier role at a small firm in Oregon, no executive title, no real influence. I didn't smile when I heard. I didn't scoff. I just closed the message and moved on. You see, the moment I stepped out of that boardroom, I stopped living in his shadow. That day wasn't just about exposing him. It was about reclaiming every piece of me I had once handed over in the name of love, partnership, or compromise. Now, I had a daughter. I had work that mattered. I had morning coffee with sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, and evenings filled with the giggles of a child who didn't yet know the world could be cruel. And then one day, something happened that reminded me why I had to speak up in the first place. I was invited to a roundtable for women executives in Los Angeles, a closed-door summit for industry leaders to discuss workplace ethics, gender inequality, and rebuilding trust in a post-scandal age. I wasn't the most well-known person there, not by a long shot. But as the sessions went on, it became clear that people weren't interested in theory or fluff. They wanted real stories. And when it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I talked about love. About betrayal. About how corporate structures so often excuse behavior as long as it comes wrapped in results. I talked about what it feels like to be dismissed quietly, to be gaslit while you sit across from someone who knows exactly what they're hiding. I talked about power, not the kind found in titles or salaries, but the kind that comes from saying, I know the truth. And I won't let you bury it. Afterward, a woman approached me in the hallway. Her name was Ava. She was a VP at a tech company downtown. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Your story, she said, swallowing hard. It's mine too. Only I didn't catch it in time. I lost everything. I put a hand on her shoulder. Then now's your time to rebuild. That's what it became, eventually, my work. Not just building policies or advising HR departments, but showing people, especially women, that the fallout from betrayal isn't the end. It's the foundation. The ground zero where you begin again, but stronger. Smarter. Fiercer. I started consulting more frequently. Not just for companies, but for individuals. I helped women collect evidence safely. Navigate confrontations legally. I didn't just help them destroy the liars, I helped them rebuild themselves. And through it all, Isla grew. Her first word was book. Fitting, really. She loved to pull them from the shelves and sit on the rug with Rusty curled around her like a sleepy guardian. She smiled so easily, as if she knew the world could hurt, but that her world, this small, soft, safe corner I had created, was different. One afternoon, she fell asleep on my lap, her tiny hand curled around my finger. I looked down at her peaceful face and felt it all rise inside me, the grief, the rage, the exhaustion, the triumph. And I whispered, you'll never have to earn love by shrinking yourself. Not while I'm here. Because that's what had nearly destroyed me in my marriage, not just the cheating or the lies. But the way I had made myself small so he could feel big. The way I'd silenced my doubts, rationalized his absences, and gaslighted my own instincts for the sake of harmony. Never again. And Isla? She would grow up knowing that her mother had not just survived betrayal, she'd used it as fuel. That weekend, I got an invitation from Lennox and Rudd. Not for a meeting. For a keynote. They were launching a new initiative, an ethics pledge for all executives, required annual training, and a formal whistleblower protection policy. They wanted me to speak. To tell the story that started it all. I hesitated. Not because I wasn't ready, but because part of me wondered. Was this closure? Then I realized something. Closure isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose. The day of the keynote was overcast, the kind of gray Los Angeles rarely offers, like even the sky wanted to mute itself for something serious. I wore a slate blue dress, simple and strong, paired with the necklace my mother had given me years ago when I passed the bar. A quiet reminder, you were made for more than survival. I brought Isla with me. She didn't attend the event, of course, she stayed in the hotel suite upstairs with our nanny, but I needed her near. She was my anchor now. My reminder that every shattered thing I'd rebuilt was for something greater than myself. The lobby of Lennox and Rudd's new headquarters looked the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. People greeted me with polite smiles that didn't feel forced. Some even nodded with recognition, quiet gratitude hiding behind professional courtesy. They didn't see me as Tyler Mitchell's ex-wife anymore. They saw me as Rebecca Hart, the woman who dared to pull the curtain back when everyone else pretended not to see. I stood backstage watching the opening remarks. Then my name was announced. I stepped into the light, not with fear, but with purpose. The podium was taller than I remembered. The room was fuller. Hundreds of executives, analysts, HR reps, legal officers, all waiting for something polished. But I didn't give them polished. I gave them real. I was married to one of your rising stars, I began. Smart, charismatic, respected. But behind closed doors, he used company money to fund his affair. He leveraged his position for personal gain. And for months, no one questioned it. Why? Because his numbers looked good. Because he smiled in meetings. Because he fit the image. No one moved. Integrity, I continued, isn't about how things look. It's about how things are when no one's watching. And I was watching. I was the one person he thought didn't matter. I paused. And that was his mistake. I didn't go into every sordid detail. I didn't need to. The room knew. They'd read the policy updates, seen the quiet restructuring. My story had been told through memos and silence. But now they were hearing it from the source. And it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Companies don't fall apart because of scandals, I said. They fall apart because too many people knew and said nothing. Because people like Rachel are protected by people like Tyler, who are protected by silence. Heads nodded. Pens scratched across notepads. I'm not here because I enjoy telling this story, I said, steady now. I'm here because someone has to. Because if even one woman in this room is sitting on something that's tearing her apart, afraid to speak, afraid to lose everything, she deserves to know that she is not alone. And she is not powerless. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, but real. Heavy. Sustained. A few people stood. I didn't expect it. I didn't need it. But it meant something. Afterwards, people lined up to speak to me. Not to flatter, but to confess. A manager who said she'd ignored complaints she now regretted. A junior partner who quietly asked for my contact information. And Ava, the woman I'd met at the round table, stood in line just to say. I filed the report. She didn't need to say more. That night, I sat on the hotel balcony, Isla curled asleep beside me, the breeze soft against my cheek. I could hear the city humming beneath us, so full of stories, of people clinging to things they should have let go long ago. My phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in almost 6 months. Tyler Mitchell. I stared at the screen. He shouldn't have had this number. But curiosity won. I answered without a word. His voice came through cracked and bitter. You win, Rebecca. I wasn't playing, I replied. I lost everything. No, I said calmly. You just finally saw what you were without me covering it up. Silence. I'm sorry, he muttered. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it. I let that hang in the air. Good, I said finally. Say it to yourself, too. Then I hung up. I didn't need his apology. Not because I didn't deserve it, but because I had already healed beyond it. I had built something better in its place. A life. A home. A daughter. And a voice no one could take from me again. A week later, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. Inside was a short note. You taught me more than any conference or seminar ever did. I hope someday I can do the same for someone else. R. Rachel. It didn't make me feel warm or vindicated. It just confirmed what I already knew. People change when the truth refuses to stay buried. And sometimes, consequences speak louder than revenge. The year after everything collapsed was the year I finally learned what it meant to live freely. Not cautiously. Not defensively. But freely. The house in Silver Lake bloomed into something more than shelter, it became a sanctuary. The red geraniums on the balcony burst with color in early spring, and my backyard garden, small, imperfect, full of life, flourished in a way that felt symbolic. Like everything I had planted during my darkest season was finally pushing through the soil. Isla was walking now, more like wobbling, really, her tiny feet padding across the hardwood floors while Rusty trailed behind like a loyal shadow. She laughed constantly, as if the world were still an innocent place. And every time I heard that laugh, it healed something small and quiet inside of me. I didn't talk about Tyler anymore. Not because I was avoiding the past, but because I had moved so far beyond it that revisiting him felt like rereading a book I had already closed. And Rachel? She stayed gone. No more letters. No attempts to justify. No quiet stalking on social media. Just silence. The kind that says, I finally got it. But the truth is, I didn't need remorse from the people who hurt me. I had something far more powerful, rebirth. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a leadership symposium titled Women Who Rise. It was held in a restored train depot, now a venue for entrepreneurs, changemakers, and those who'd rebuilt themselves from the ashes. They wanted me to be the closing speaker. I stood backstage, watching other women share their stories of loss, of injustice, of clawing their way back through corporate lies, abusive relationships, failed ventures. Every voice was a fire in the dark. And when it was my turn, I walked to the stage not as someone who had triumphed over betrayal, but as someone who had transcended it. My name is Rebecca Hart, I began. And I used to believe that if I worked hard, stayed loyal, and loved deeply, I would be safe. A pause. I wasn't. I told them everything. The late-night discoveries. The gut-punch grief. The boardroom showdown. The suitcases. The silence. The rise. Not in vivid drama, but in truth. Then I said something I hadn't ever said aloud before. I used to think my story was about betrayal. But it wasn't. It was about trust. Trusting myself again. Trusting that my pain didn't make me weak. That my anger wasn't dangerous, it was divine. That rebuilding alone wasn't sad, it was sacred. I saw heads nodding. Eyes glistening. Then I smiled. My daughter will never know the woman I used to be, the one who flinched at red flags, who apologized for being suspicious, who shrank herself to fit someone else's ego. She will only know the woman I became. The woman who stood up. Who walked out. Who built a life where no one else had the power to burn it down. Thunderous applause. Not for me. For the truth. That night, back at home, I laid on the couch with Isla sleeping on my chest and Rusty curled by our feet. The windows were open, and the coastal wind carried the scent of lavender through the room. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. There were no shoes. No cliffhangers. Just now. I looked down at my daughter and whispered. You're never going to have to search for your worth in someone else's eyes. You were born enough. And I meant it. In the months that followed, I worked with companies across the country, reforming ethics systems, helping whistleblowers, mentoring young women in law and finance who had seen too many boardrooms dominated by too many men who thought silence was the path to power. But the most meaningful part? I began writing. Not policies. Not legal briefs. Stories. Real ones. Stories like mine. Stories like yours. And that's what brought me here. To you. To this channel. To this story. Because here's the thing. Sometimes betrayal is the best thing that ever happens to you. Not because it doesn't hurt. It does. Deeply. But because it burns away everything fake. Every illusion. Every excuse. And what's left is you. The real you. The powerful you. The you that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't doubt. The you that stands, speaks, and walks forward even if your voice trembles and your legs are weak. Because silence may protect others. But courage? Courage protects you. So here's what I want you to remember. You don't owe anyone your suffering. You don't have to keep secrets that scorch your soul. And you are not meant to be a supporting role in someone else's story. You are the author. You are the lead. And you get to choose the ending. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you of something powerful. You don't need revenge to reclaim your life. You just need the truth and the courage to tell it. Have you ever been betrayed in silence? Have you ever walked away with nothing and still found yourself stronger than before? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone. And if this story touched you, please subscribe to Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge. Because sometimes, the most powerful comeback is living free.